I have sat across from hundreds of people who spent their entire lives building something, only to arrive at my door asking the same quiet question: why does none of this feel like enough? They come to me after 60, most of them. Some have money. Some have big houses with rooms nobody uses anymore. Some raise children who now have children of their own. Some spent 40 years climbing toward a title, a paycheck, a version of respect they were promised would feel like peace once they finally reached it. And when they sit in front of me, I see the same tired eyes. I hear the same trembling in their voice when they finally say it out loud. I did everything I was supposed to do, and I still don't feel free. I have listened to men who built companies from nothing, and women who raised entire families while holding together jobs, homes, marriages, and expectations from every direction. I have heard confessions from people who achieved more than most could ever dream of, and yet they whisper the same words to me, almost ashamed of themselves for saying it. I don't know who I am without all of this. I did not live every version of their pain myself, but I have received it again and again from strangers who trusted me with their exhaustion. And after so many years of listening, I have learned something that took me a long time to understand, and even longer to say out loud clearly. The weight they carried did not come from working, from owning a home, from raising a family, or from wanting stability. The weight came from somewhere quieter, somewhere most people never think to look. Before we go further, take a moment and check that you are subscribed to this channel, and tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching this today? I always find it moving to see how many different lives, how many different corners of the world gather here to sit with these reflections together. Now let me tell you what I have come to understand, sitting with so many tired hearts. The prison does not begin with ambition. It begins the moment a person starts measuring their worth by what they have collected, by the title on their door, the number in their account, the image they present to others, or the approval they chase from people who may not even remember doing the chasing. I think of a river sometimes when I try to explain this. A river does not stop moving because it fears becoming still. It moves because that is its nature, and when it finally reaches the sea, it does not mourn the miles behind it. But a person can spend a whole life moving like a river that no longer remembers why it runs. They keep flowing, not from purpose, but from fear of what stillness might reveal. I have sat with men who built houses larger than the ones they grew up in, only to admit that they built them to silence a voice from childhood that told them they would never be enough. I have sat with women who filled their calendars until there was no space left to breathe, because stopping felt like disappearing. None of these people are foolish. None of them are broken. They simply spent so long climbing that no one ever asked them if they wanted to reach the top of that particular mountain. You do not need to burn down everything you built to find your way back to yourself. You only need to look honestly at what still holds meaning, and what you have only kept alive out of fear, habit, guilt, or the need to be seen a certain way by people who may no longer even be watching. This is the truth I have come to trust after all these years. Not every dream a person chases was ever truly their own. Some dreams are handed down, dressed up as ambition, and worn like a second skin until the person forgets they ever had a choice in the matter. Before I let another voice continue this conversation with you, I want to share something. Many of the reflections I have carried over the years about aging, about inner peace, about silence, and about the lessons our modern world has quietly forgotten have been gathered into a book called The Last Teachings. It reads the way I would speak if you were sitting beside me, nothing more complicated than that. If these words have stirred something in you, you will find the link in the first comment. I will leave you with this before I step back and let the story continue. You are not required to abandon your history, your family, but you are allowed to stop living like a prisoner inside a version of yourself that stopped being true a long time ago.
What our elder just revealed touches something that millions of people carry in silence, often without ever finding the words for it themselves. It is easy to hear his message and think of it as a single observation, a passing thought from one wise man. But it is not. It is a pattern that repeats itself in nearly every life that crosses into its 60s, 70s, and beyond. A quiet reckoning between the life a person built and the life a person actually wanted. From childhood, most people are handed a blueprint they never asked. Family teaches it, school reinforces it, advertising sharpens it into something shiny and urgent. Culture repeats it so often that it starts to sound like truth. Work harder, earn more, buy more, achieve more, impress. Somewhere along the way, the question of whether a person actually wants any of it gets lost beneath the noise of simply keeping up. This is not a flaw of character. It is the water people swim in without noticing. They watch neighbors renovate homes and feel a pull to do the same. They watch co-workers get promoted and feel a need to catch up. Friends post vacations and purchases and milestones and quietly recalibrate what enough is supposed to look like. Slowly, without any single dramatic moment, an entire life gets built around expectations that were never actually chosen, only absorbed, one small comparison at a time, until they hardened into something that felt like personal ambition. This is the heart of what people mean when they speak of the American dream. It promises comfort, and often it delivers exactly that. Stability, a full refrigerator, a paid mortgage, recognition at work, a pension that arrives on time. But comfort was never the same thing as peace, and stability was never the same thing as meaning. A person can have all the comfort in the world and still lie awake at night wondering what any of it was actually. It is worth saying plainly, there is nothing shameful about wanting a stable home, a good career, or financial security. Those things are not the enemy. The danger is quieter. It appears when a person stops asking whether the goal still fits who they have become and simply keeps running toward it because stopping has started to feel unfamiliar, even frightening. There are signs, and once someone learns to recognize them, they are difficult to unsee. A constant undercurrent of irritation that has no clear cause, showing up in traffic, in small disagreements, in moments that used to feel harmless. A hollow feeling that follows every achievement instead of satisfaction. The promotion arrives, the house is finally paid off, the milestone is reached, and instead of relief, there is only a strange, quiet flatness. A fear of rest, as though stopping for even a single day might cause the whole structure. A numbness where excitement used to live, so that things that once brought joy now barely register at all. There is anxiety that hums quietly in the background of ordinary days, never loud enough to name, but never fully absent either. There is an emotional exhaustion that sleep never seems to touch, no matter how many hours are given to. There is the growing difficulty of imagining any other way to live. When someone has spent 30 or 40 years inside one identity, provider, achiever, the reliable one, the strong one who never asks. Imagining a different shape for their life can feel almost like imagining their own disappearance. And beneath all of it often sits a quiet, persistent need to keep proving something, to keep protecting an image that took decades to construct, along with a painful suspicion that the best years were spent fulfilling expectations that were never truly their own to begin with. None of these signs arrive all at once. They gather slowly, the way dust gathers on a shelf no one has looked at in years. And by the time a person finally notices, they have often spent a long time living inside a house they no longer recognize as their own. Familiar walls, unfamiliar life. Much of this weight was never chosen consciously. It was built from things heard in childhood, a parent's disappointment that never fully faded, a sibling's comparison repeated at every family gathering, a teacher's careless remark that somehow lodged itself permanently. Some people learned early that love or attention had to be earned through performance, and they never truly stopped performing, even decades later, even long after the people who set that standard were gone. Old humiliations, old rejections, old failures nobody else remembers become the invisible architecture behind decades of ambition. This is why some people do not work simply because they love their work. They work because some part of them is still trying to answer an old accusation that they were not enough, not capable, not worthy of respect, not as good as a brother, a classmate, a rival from long ago. They chase success not purely for its own sake, but as evidence against an old wound. And because that wound rarely heals through achievement alone, no matter how much is accumulated, the chasing rarely stops on its own. It usually takes a pause, often forced by age, illness, retirement, or loss, before a person even notices that the race was never really about winning in the first place. By the time people reach this stage of life, change can feel almost impossible to consider, and the fear behind that is rarely simple or single. There is a fear of losing financial security built over an entire lifetime of careful saving, a fear of disappointing children who grew up watching a very specific version of their parent, and who may not understand a sudden shift, a fear of being judged by neighbors, siblings, old friends, or even strangers online, all of whom have their own opinions about what a successful later life should look like. There is a fear of starting over with fewer years ahead than behind, a fear that time itself has become a resource too precious to risk on uncertainty. There is a fear of admitting that a plan followed faithfully for decades may no longer serve any real purpose, which can feel like admitting that years were wasted, even when they... There is a fear of appearing ungrateful for a life that, on paper, looks entirely successful. And underneath all of these sights, perhaps the hardest fear of all, the fear of discovering who they are without the job title, the income, the reputation, or the responsibilities they used to define themselves by. This is not simply resistance to external change, it is a confrontation with identity itself. If a person spent 40 years being the provider or the one who never stops working, stepping back does not just change a schedule, it forces a much deeper question. Who am I, if not this? That question can feel more frightening than any financial risk, because there is no clear answer waiting on the other side of it, only the discomfort of having to search. It is worth pausing here to separate two things that often get confused, sometimes deliberately, by the very expectations a person is trying to release. Stepping back from an old expectation, slowing down, or choosing a different direction is not the same as failure. Failure implies a goal was pursued honestly and simply not reached. Letting go is different. It means recognizing that a goal, however well pursued, however admirable its pursuit once seemed, no longer belongs to who a person has become. Letting go might mean releasing an identity that stopped fitting years ago, the way a coat still hangs in the closet long after it stopped being worn. It might mean setting down an obligation that never had real meaning to begin with, one inherited rather than chosen. It might mean stepping out of a competition no one else is even still running, a rivalry only in memory. It might mean quieting an internal voice that keeps score long after the game has ended, tallying everybody else's, counting it. It might mean being honest about appearance, genuine connection, or releasing a dream inherited disappointment born. It might simply mean letting go of the need to impress people who are no longer even part of daily life, whose opinions stopped mattering long ago without anyone noticing. None of this erases what came before. A person does not need to reject 40 years of effort to acknowledge that a chapter has closed. The years still happened. The lessons still count. The love that was real is still real. Letting go simply means no longer forcing an old chapter to keep writing itself long after its story naturally finished. None of this is a call to abandon family, responsibility, home, or hard-earned stability without careful reflection. That would only trade one kind of prison for another, equally confining in a different shape. The transformation being described here is internal before it is ever external, quiet before it is visible to anyone else. The real work is separating what still holds genuine meaning from what has simply continued out of fear, guilt, appearance, or habit. A person can remain in the same home, keep many of the same responsibilities, maintain the relationships that truly matter, and still release the invisible prison that once forced them to constantly prove their worth to an audience that may not even be watching. The house does not need to change. The job does not need to end tomorrow. What needs to change is the quiet belief that any of it was ever required to earn the right to simply exist in peace, exactly as one is. In place of the old measuring sticks, more money, more status, more approval, more proof, something quieter becomes available if a person is willing to notice it. Simplicity instead of constant accumulation. Presence instead of distraction. Time spent with people who matter instead of time spent managing appearances for people who do not. Contact with nature and its unhurried rhythm, the kind that does not ask to be impressed. Rest without the guilt that used to follow it like a shadow. Genuine experiences instead of curated ones, chosen for their own sake rather than for how they. There is also room for reconciliation, pushed to pride, distance, or old. A return of curiosity, the kind that gets buried under decades of responsibility and rediscovered almost by accident. Emotional freedom from expectations that were never truly one's own. Silence that no longer feels uncomfortable or wasteful. Gentleness toward oneself, often for the first time in many years. The simple capacity to appreciate what already exists rather than always reaching for whatever comes next. And, perhaps most quietly powerful of all, the courage to say no to whatever has clearly stopped making sense, without needing to justify that no to anyone. None of this promises a life free of problem. Peace was never about the absence of difficulty, and no book, no teaching, no realization removes hardship from a life entirely. Peace is simply what becomes possible when a person stops living in constant conflict with themselves, when the inner argument finally quiets down enough to hear something else. Consider for a moment what life might feel like if there were nothing left to prove. What weight would still feel worth carrying even without an audience watching? What would finally be safe to put down after all these years of holding it upright? Which commitments remain standing because they are rooted in love, and which have only survived because of fear dressed up as duty? What still deserves a place in the years ahead, and what has quietly, patiently earned its right? These are not questions with easy answers, and they are not meant to be answered in a single sitting or even a single season, but simply asking them honestly without rushing toward a resolution is often the first real step toward the kind of peace so many people spend an entire lifetime searching for everywhere except within them. If these words have touched something in you, you may want to spend more time with the last teaching. In it, our elder gathered some of his most important reflections on solitude, relationships, inner peace, and what truly matters as the years accumulate. As part of it, you will also receive at no extra cost a short teaching called The Secrets of the First Hour, the quiet morning habits many elders once considered sacred ways to begin the day. The link is in the first comment. Perhaps the greatest achievement after 60 is not something new to acquire, but something old to reclaim. The peace, the time, the identity, and the freedom that were quietly set aside somewhere along the way, traded piece by piece for things that seemed, at the time, none of this requires rejecting the life already lived. A person can honor everything they built, every sacrifice, every long shift, every sleepless worry over a mortgage or a child's future, and, at the same time, stop letting old expectations decide what happens next. The years spent working, raising a family, and building stability, they were simply the first part of the story, not its final chapter, and certainly not it. And so the truest freedom that arrives after 60 may not be found in reaching for one more thing, but in finally, gently releasing what was never truly the heart's own dream to begin with.